district joint committee meeting. And I think certainly I can say that a lot has happened since we last met, and I don't think we'll ever forget 2020, sadly, for all those people who have lost their lives to the coronavirus, and the challenges that we've all had to face in our towns, cities, and mostly our communities, especially as local councillors. I'm going to start by saying that I think we're all acutely aware of the challenges that face transport in the coming months, if not years. Not only those posed by the current COVID pandemic, but those pre-existing challenges. Challenges including declining bus patronage, a congested rail network, an urgent action needed to combat air pollution and provide a low carbon future, and the need to offer a modernised and integrated transport network for the people of West Yorkshire. Across West Yorkshire, we share common aspirations around providing world-class transport that is integrated, low carbon, accessible, affordable, reliable, and supports a sustainable economic growth. We're all behind that. I want to start by sort of thanking everyone for their support over the last year. This is my second year in the role. Particularly the Transport Committee, who have worked really hard, but the public members that have supported us. And particularly thank you to all the officers at WYCA who do an enormous amount of work. It's people think it's a huge organisation, but it's not. Actually, the resources are very fine in comparison to the council that I represent, which is Leeds City Council. So the team do a tremendous job, and hopefully more resources will come in terms of the Devo deal. But thank you particularly to my district chairs and Councillor Korshik and Martin Boat, who is the opposition member on the Transport Committee. The Transport Committee work has contributed both effectively and efficiently to the West Yorkshire overall strategic plan. But more importantly, through elected members and public reps, we've got that real people's feel to it. That important part of any strategy is that the people are at the centre of it. And we've been able to communicate through many channels. Pre-COVID, we were having consultations in bus stations, Your Voice, and the district committees that are really valued. And very much the work as we continue has to be, the people of West Yorkshire have to be part of that plan. Our work streams now cover the following, and it's great that we have got the district chairs, and hopefully this year they'll be able to hold more meetings once lockdown has finished, or even use Zoom or technology to get more people involved. And they very much have the autonomy to set their own agenda. I'm really pleased to say that the work that we have covered as a Transport Committee, which means then you can take out to the districts and your chair can ask for any support on the following work streams over the next year and beyond as we move into the devolution process. So we've started our work on an economic recovery plan, and part of that is a transport recovery plan that will be shared far and wide as soon as possible. The other things that we've been doing throughout the year, we've looked at the bus network, we've got the Bus Alliance, and I thank our partners for the work that they've contributed on that. We've been looking at demand responsive transport, active travel, cycling and walking plans, which we've got a connectivity plan, and now that can be shared across West Yorkshire, that work. We've all really focused on customer experiences through our Rail Operators Forum and also through the Bus Alliance. We've started work with elected members, and again, the Transport Committee, thank you, because they've given 10 to 12 hours of time on the West Yorkshire Rail Vision that you'll be all keen to see, I'm sure, at the next Transport Committees going forward. Transforming Cities, we got the highest award in the country of 313 million. However, the leaders have pledged to deliver Transforming Cities in Full, which is amazing. It will create jobs throughout West Yorkshire, and it is what it says. It will transform places and hopefully transform means of travel. We've submitted to the National Infrastructure Commission, and that report has been shared. I'm sure that's something that you'd be able to view publicly. We've got the future transport connectivity plan. We've been looking at the new railways across West Yorkshire, new bus stations, cycle hubs, and making sure that we're working on those first class gateways that are right across West Yorkshire. Obviously, we've got the cities of Leeds and Bradford, but it's about more than that. The gateways must include all the districts, and you will see that in the Transforming Cities plan. We've also worked on the zero carbon work, which sits with the Green Economy panel, but we are looking at decarbonising transport for all modes and providing that route map to work on. Mass rapid transit, again, the Transport Committee have been heavily involved in the connectivity strategy and what will mass rapid transport look like in the future. We don't get the schemes, they sit at Investment Committee, but often schemes are viewed by the Transport Committee to make sure that we've got the public transport intervention. We had a presentation from the ports, and the work along freight has never been more important. So that will continue. We're continuously now being contacted by people around the electric scooters. So these are the pieces of work that we've been doing as a Transport Committee. So thank you for everybody who's been involved in that. Thank you to the bus operators for the forum, the rail operators for attending the rail forum. There are some more, a new bus working group that was passed at the last Transport Committee. And in terms of going forward, we're looking now at 2 new panels, an expert panel, to make sure that we've got national figures on bus and rail with the operators that we work with presently to make the decisions. So call the district chair. Everything that I've covered, they will be able to hold their own sessions on, whether it be remotely or whether it be hopefully soon back in the public arena. But thank you for all your contributions, and I'm going to hand over to Dave Pearson now.
Afternoon, everyone. This is the first time we've done one of these districts subcommittees using the Zoom technology, so we're all learning, aren't we, in terms of how to use that. One of the things I would just ask everybody is to put yourselves on mute and then indicate if you want to speak, because otherwise everybody will get your background noise. So that's, if you can do that, would be most appreciated. I'm sure it's not as satisfactory as meeting in the same room. I think we all understand that, but a necessary thing at this particular moment in time. So if you can bear with us, and then hopefully everybody can have their opportunity, and we've got colleagues who are taking notes of the meeting. What we wanted to do with you this afternoon was Councillor Groves has given us a pretty good update as to where things are. I'm just going to add a few more pieces of thoughts and information to that. Open it up for a little bit of question and answer at the early stage, and then we've got two sort of presentations to give you. One, a brief summary of our latest custom research, which illustrates the attitudes to travel from people in the current COVID emergency situation, and then the main thing we want to talk to you about this afternoon, and I think it's useful to get your feedback on, is a draft transport recovery plan. What we're seeking to do is to plan out what the next couple of years looks like, so that we can rebuild our transport networks, adapt to the changed world that this emergency has caused us, and develop and end in a stronger place coming out of that. So that the main event today really is to talk you through where we got to with the plan and get some input from you. Just on a few pointers. I'm not going to labour too much in terms of an update, because Councillor Groves has given you the sort of wide sweep of the things that we're looking at the combined authority. And I don't want to talk too much about the COVID emergency because that's the main event on the agenda. But just a few sort of points to start off with on that. I think it's fair to recognise, I'm sure you're all aware, that bus services and rail services are currently operating under emergency public funding arrangements, and therefore the buses and trains that are out there are being subsidised by a taxpayer, simply because, as you'll appreciate, there just aren't the people using them to generate the fares revenue to support them. And obviously what we will need to do and talk to you in the recovery plan is that, when that emergency funding starts to end, then we've got to manage a transition away from a service that's been supported by a lot of public money back to where it was. And I think that's one of the challenges we've got in the future. And we are a little bit sort of challenged by government not being entirely clear as to what the funding packages and what the timescales of funding packages are. I think the other big thing that lots of colleagues are working on at the moment, and I'm sure one or two of you might have questions about, is the return to school in September, and that we're doing a lot of work with schools, with local councils, to add additional bus provision into the mix so that we can get those pupils that use the bus to school able to get to school with the social distancing constraints that are existing on the transport network at the moment. Again, we're in dialogue with the government about funding for that, and we this afternoon will be launching a survey across all of West Yorkshire to try and get as much information about what parents and pupils are intending about travelling to school in September, so that we can factor that into our planning. So if you've got children in the family that are going back to school, then we would entirely encourage people to get onto the Combined Authorities website, find the survey, and give us as much information as we need to help plan. We have had some money from government for short-term things to support walking and cycling, and we were successful in our bids to government for that, and that's very much about during the emergency, people have been walking, cycling more. Some people are reluctant to use public transport for safety reasons, and what the last thing we want to do is actually create a situation where there's more and more car use. So this is to try and make a little bit more space so that pedestrians can walk in a more socially distanced way, and cyclists can cycle more safely. So we've got a package of work ongoing, and we can detail that as well. So that's where we are in terms of the things that are happening right now. What I think we probably should do, Councillor Groves, is just invite questions at this point. Then we'll get into the survey. Then we'll get into the transport recovery plan.
Okay, so questions and comments. You can either raise your hand, I don't think I'll be able to see all 54 people. So if you can use the blue hand, or if you want to post in the chat, I'll try and keep an eye on the chat as well. So any questions or comments? I've seen Paul, Peter. Peter, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me, Chair?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Peter. Go ahead.
The question is regarding the situation at Wakefield Kirkgate and the public toilets. Do we know what the latest position is with them ground? What's happening with them? Because they were supposed to be installed at the end of last year, and they still not working.
I didn't quite catch that, Peter. Could you repeat it? Dave, did you get?
Is that a question around the public toilets at Wakefield Kirkgate and when they're going to open?
Right.
That's correct. I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is Pete Myers on the call?
I don't know. Northern, and I'm not sure if Pete's on the call. No, we're going to have to seek clarification from Northern.
Yeah, okay.
I've not had any update, but Peter, what we'll do is we'll reply to you individually on that one, because we need Northern to answer that question. So next I've got Mark Parry. Mark. Mark, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Right, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, it's about public consultation. We just wondered at what point do projects require consultation? We noticed some road schemes, the smaller ones seem to go ahead and there's no consultation process. And also there are changes to some quite minor changes to contracted bus services. Just wanted to know what's the criteria, at what point you say, right, that needs a public consultation.
Okay, that's a really good question. And I do acknowledge that obviously that there is a judgment call as to the extent to which we are able or we do consult on schemes. If we take smallish highway schemes first, then they're often consulted as part of the traffic regulation order process by the local authorities, which is a bit of a formal rather than an informal consultation that happens. Larger schemes, capital schemes, we do generally do a consultation process at some point before construction starts, in the sort of sequence of events that happen between the funding being approved and the construction starting, just to inform the design. And there are occasionally situations where we do two sets of consultation, one at an early stage of the scheme, just to make sure the scheme is the right scheme, and then later to consult on the details. But it is, you know, we do try and consult on all the major schemes, and it's either consultation by the combined authority if it's our scheme, or by the respective local authority if it's their scheme. Bus services is a tricky one, to be absolutely fair, Mark. We have consulted on wider network related service changes, and we've often consulted at the very early stages of those processes. It's very difficult to consult on a service by service change basis. And whilst we encourage bus operators on their commercial service changes to engage, you know, we can't compel them to do that. And there's some good practices the bus companies have done on consulting on service changes, and there are some times when they haven't done any and given us some problems. So I fully acknowledge that it is a little bit inconsistent around bus service changes, but at the end of the day, a bus operator gives 2 months notice of making a bus service change. That's advertised to a statutory process, and people have the ability, should they choose to do so, and are aware of how to do so, I guess, raise issues within that particular process. If there are any bus services that are changing that people have concerns with, then by all means get in touch with Edwin and his team, and we can look at that. So hopefully that answers your question, Mark. It's not a one size fits all.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any more questions or comments before we... Cliff Baker, do you want to come in, Cliff?
This morning, the Prime Minister had a press conference, and I believe he announced something with regard to effectively removing the current restrictions or guidance with regard to bus travel. I'm not clear whether that referred to frequency of services, social distancing, or government support for the current emergency arrangements. Have you any idea what he was referring to?
No, I think it took us all by surprise, and myself and Dave, just about half an hour ago, were having a conversation because we were both in meetings while this were announced, trying to find the text behind that. So we're hoping that some guidelines come out, but we're also hoping some cash follows those guidelines as well. Yeah, but we'll keep you updated. We haven't, Dave.
Yes, that's true. I mean, you know as much as we know. We've seen what's been said. The pattern that this goes to is that often the Prime Minister or one of the ministers will announce something, and then several days later, the government website will have a little bit more detail around what it's about. And we're in the pattern now of waiting until we read the detail before we actually sort of are able to do anything about it. It's a good question. Unfortunately, Prime Minister couldn't come on this afternoon to answer it, but we'll try and get it. We will make sense of it and work with it.
I hesitate to comment, but I think had he come on, we wouldn't have known a great deal more. End of story.
We couldn't possibly comment, but we've asked Westminster politicians to come before, and we always have an empty chair at Transport Committee.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Andy?
Hi. I was wondering, for years we've been talking about integrated transport, and the stumbling block's always been the deregulated system and all the operators doing what's best for them rather than what's best for the bigger picture. At the moment, everything's running under public subsidy. So do we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here to build an properly integrated system, even if it's only temporarily? Well, public money is controlling everything. And it's then, at the very least, it's a yardstick for what can come after.
That's a very good question, and an interesting and a challenging question. In terms of where we are at the moment, even if we wanted to run the services, there'll be subsidised services that we're going to find ourselves difficult to deliver because we do not have the funding, and we're paying the concessionary rate over at the same as it was pre-COVID. We're certainly pushing government for more funding. We've got major challenges around. We've only got 1,400 buses, because of the challenges that we're facing at the moment. We may have to go out and procure more buses. I think there's ongoing conversations to have. The reason why we have worked and work with an alliance is to try and obviously deliver the best possible services for the people of West Yorkshire. As you will know, in Liverpool and Manchester, who have gone down the franchising route, the eye-watering of millions of pounds that they've had to spend to get to a stage to prove to government that actually they could run the services better than the operators. There's things on that I think in this climate, financially, every penny I feel should be spent on people and services and delivering services for those people. We geographically have a very challenging area to deliver to, because we've got those rural routes where the services have got down to 1 hour, and financial constraints both at a local government level and at a WYCA level are making things more challenging on a weekly basis. And I know what you're alluding to in terms of how we may be running the services. We may have more subsidised services than the operators have commercial services if this trend continues. So that's on our mind. We're obviously doing work in the background and working still with the operators. In terms of an integrated system, I think we're on the cusp of coming out with a lot of work that has been taking place for 2 years that the Transport Committee have been involved in, to show a connectivity strategy, to show what bus route options look like, to show what a rail network looks like, to look at what mass transit might mean and how that is integrated in, to show what demand responsive transport looks like, to show that where the active travel is routes are and how we're coordinating all that into one West Yorkshire proposal. I think we are closer than we have ever been in terms of going out there and saying, this is a future vision. These are the transport systems that will be needed. These are the modes of transport, and that work's been going on for 2 years. So I'm hoping that actually we've done a lot of talking about it in the past, that actually West Yorkshire over the next 5 or 10 years delivers that first class transport system for the people of West Yorkshire. I think Dave wants to come in now.
Just to add on Mr. Dewsbury's point, which is a good one. I think that the next 6 months or 9 months is quite critical, because at the moment everybody's efforts has been on providing a service that gets people to work, that keeps the economy running, and keeping the economy running is the most important thing we need to do with public transport. So then why the next 6 to 9 months is critical is because at some point, hopefully, the virus will have less and less effect. People will come back to public transport, and how we transition from the current position to probably a different mix of public and private money in the bus network will depend on lots of different things, and then everybody is predicting that there will be fewer people using public transport in the next 2 or 3 years, partly because their travel habits have been changed, because their working habits have changed. So we do have an opportunity, you're quite right, in terms of saying that different balance of public and private money into the bus service produces a number of threats, but it's also a number of opportunities to maybe get a little bit more integration, a little bit more coordination, and a little bit more accountability for the public money is being spent on bus services. So there's some opportunities as well as some threats in the next 9 months.
I think it's the threats that's keeping me awake at night, actually. So I have got some questions in the chat. So maybe I think Andrew and Dave and Edwin might be able to pick this up. So from Peter Dixon, is there any chance the operators and West Yorkshire Metro could provide more information about the logic and assumptions behind the countdown for their apps and bus information screens? Buses are now running faster, so it's becoming more difficult to judge if users should rush. An example would be the bus being 10 minutes away on the app, then passing bus stop after 5 minutes. So something about the synchronisation of the apps there. I don't know if we've got any R operators that want to.
Shall I start, and then see if Andrew or the operators want to add? It's a good point. The traffic conditions are different. The buses are scheduled to meet traffic conditions. I know the bus operators have scheduled buses to an extent to address the different traffic conditions. The system predicts when the bus will be at the stop by where the bus actually is out on the road, and if that's different to normal traffic conditions, then it might have thrown up some anomalies. So I think we accept that. What we are in the process of doing, and the bus operators have done on their apps, is incorporating on the displays, and we should have this in a month or so's time, how full the bus is, so that people can make their judgment about that as well. But yeah, I think we often at these meetings talk about the accuracy of the real-time information, and I think I'm fairly used to sort of defending it a little bit, but I think generally most of the time it does work, but there are situations where the information struggles to keep up. So I accept that, but happy for any operator or my colleague Andrew to add to that.
Andrew, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just very briefly, we're doing as good a job as we can, given the rapid change of timetables at the moment, in keeping the system up to date. And it is broadly, you will sometimes find that in the 24 hours or so after the services have changed at the moment, where the real time may be slightly out of kilter. Where that is the case for the on-street displays and the online information that we push out, we put a scrolling message to tell people that is the case. And as soon as it is absolutely right, that scrolling information is taken away. in terms of the apps, we don't have an app ourselves, so that's one for the operators probably. But it'd be useful specifically to have any examples of where things aren't working properly, and where we get the terrible example of ghost buses, which I think Bruce Bird has alluded to. Specific examples, please feel free to send them through to us, because we will look at those, and problems do arise, and we try and iron them out whenever the public alert them to us. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew, for answering Bruce's question as well. I've got John Birkby now. John.
Hello, with shops listing putting special measures in for pensioners and disabled, is the essential publicity restrictions on the R-Pass 9 bus?
John, can you just repeat that again? We've just got some sort of disturbance in the background there.
Okay, with shops putting special measures in for pensioners and disabled, is it possible to list the 9:30 bus pass and disabled restrictions on the buses?
Councillor Grove, should I answer that one? Because we did that for about a 6-week period. Right at the beginning of this, shops were doing that, particularly when there were shortages. Shops started the sort of process of doing early shopping hours for older people. So we whilst everything was very, very quiet, we did relax that rule for a couple of weeks. But we did put it back on once the wider shops started opening and the bus services started building up. We reinstated the 9:30, and the logic behind the 9:30 is that really the system is there to the 9:30 cutoff is there to make sure that our peak time buses are not overloaded with people travelling for free and people sort of going to and from work. And we're very, very sensitive about capacity of buses at the moment because of social distancing. So we were quite nervous at the time that said, well, actually, if we kept the 9:30 cutoff too long, then we might get into some difficulties. Longer term, I honestly don't think we would relax the 9:30 rule. It's a national scheme, and I think if we do get into that, then there is fairly significant cost to the public sector side in terms of relaxing that rule. And I'm being perfectly honest, that would be a very sort of definite sort of financial discussion that our councillors would need to have to do that. So we did do that for a while, but not for the whole period.
Thank you.
Okay, so I've got Martin. I'm presuming it's Councillor Martin Bolt.
Going by the informal title, I don't know what's happened there, Kim. Thanks very much. Yeah, a couple of questions relating to buses. I had an email from a lady in Lindley saying electric buses were in operation in many parts of West Yorkshire, but not in the Lindley and therefore Kirklees area. So could we have an update on that? And Councillor Nigel Patrick from Home Firth has asked me why buses, when they are at bus stations and halts such as the one in the middle of Home Firth, don't switch their engines off, which obviously is a concern given our climate emergency, air pollution and other aspirations. You know, when they are at prolonged halts, why aren't buses switching their engines off? Thanks.
So the electric buses that I know are in Harrogate, and there are some planned for Leeds through the LIPTIP schemes, through the LIPTIP funding. And bus idling, I know that all operators have spoken to drivers about this. So I think we've got some operators on the call. I don't know if one of you wants to come in. Paul? No, I think yeah, Paul's coming in.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was another Paul, that's all. But yes, yeah, we do try and keep drivers briefed on idling for two reasons. One is it is obviously the environmental benefit, but also it's sufficient use of fuel and good driving technique as well on there. Obviously we don't serve Home Firth, but I know other operators in the area do similar as well.
I'm not familiar with the home firth situation, Martin. I don't know if you want to send that in by your email. I've not got the answer to that unless anybody else has.
It's the generic thing. As I mean, it was Nigel who raised it, but it is something that's been raised elsewhere. Which, if operators are telling their drivers to switch off when they're at prolonged halts, you know, the location could be anywhere, couldn't it? But I think Nigel specifically mentioned first bus, but obviously, if all operators are making their drivers aware, it's just isolated incidents, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll take it back to the Alliance. So we've got some more questions around cycling and walking from Leslie. It's just moved, sorry. So I'm hoping that, I think Ambrose might be on the call. I don't think Leslie, I don't know if you want to speak to this, but Leslie Webb. So you're referring to the Radio 4 interview with Chris Boardman, suggested not back in many areas?
Yeah, what it is it was a Radio 4 interview yesterday, and rather worryingly, quite a few councils across the country, having set off with good intentions to create more space for cycling and walking, have promptly been knocked back by adverse reaction and criticism of the schemes. I'm just wondering what's happening around West Yorkshire and Leeds in particular. I wouldn't like that to be happening here.
No, so I can assure you that, and I think Ambrose is on the call and will come in. And did you say Leeds there?
Yeah, I mean, I live in Leeds, so I'm particularly interested in Leeds. And,
so I think, so the emergency funding, that we've just recently had some emergency funding, which will total to around 12.5 million if we get the 10 million in August. The timescales to turn that round were really tight. However, I can honestly say that actually we have been inundated with schemes from our districts. The only thing that we've had to check out to get it out of the door, there's no disruption to the bus network or any elements outside of that. So walking and cycling across West Yorkshire, I would say it's a really healthy picture. We've probably got more schemes than we can actually fund. But I think Ambrose is here, and Councillor Peter Carhill, who's doing an awful lot of work in Leeds as active travel. I don't know if Peter wants to come in on that as well, because Peter's also not just doing the schemes, but he's also doing the streets as well.
I'd be very pleased to hear from Peter, yeah.
Yeah, Peter? I've seen his name.
Very happy to, yeah.
There it is.
Obviously, Ambrose can comment on wider across West Yorkshire, because I apologise, I've been so involved in the schemes in Leeds that I probably haven't paid enough attention to the ones in other districts, so hopefully Ambrose can comment on those. One of the struggles we knew was that the funding required schemes to be on the ground and in place within 8 weeks, so we were conscious of the fact that didn't leave much time for us to design and implement them, let alone to consult on a number of the schemes. That's one of the reasons why a number of the schemes in Leeds that you'll see, we've got quite an ambitious plan that we put out for an online consultation before the funding was agreed, in order to get as many comments as possible from people. And we had 4,500 people respond to that, putting in over 21,000 comments in Leeds alone. And I know West Yorkshire's got a similar scheme across a similar consultation site. But one of the reasons for the consultation is why you saw quite a lot of cycling schemes in Leeds first. And that's ones we've already released on our Tube Map Cycle Ambition, but many of those had already been seen. There were intentions to come at some point when funding allowed and have been discussed with residents. But therefore, we were expecting that we wouldn't see any backlash of those. We've also made sure that they didn't pop up overnight and that people have at least had some notice that they're going to be in. And I think that's key. Quite a lot of the knockback has been where schemes have turned up with majority of residents or shopkeepers not hearing about them and not being able to have a conversation about them. We do stress as well, they are trial measures. So the ones that are cones or ours are Wandorfers, they can be moved, and we're very happy to speak to people and have them moved. And the ones that went in on Kirkstall Road in Leeds, we had some comments, the majority of which were to widen them and take the scheme further, I must add, which we then have taken account of. So we're designing up ways to widen that and hopefully take a bit more space for the cycle lane. But yes, the next set of schemes is around active travel neighbourhoods, which is reducing the car usage in a number of residential estates across the city. Actually, in our consultation, we put out 70% of people across Leeds supported the reduction of traffic volume on residential streets permanently, let alone the trial measures. So we're reasonably confident about those, and we're doing all we can to talk to people on the street, but we are very conscious of the problems that you're raising, Les, and I think it's important that these are done with as much consultation as time allows, even if that purely is a letter to everyone letting them know it's coming in and what they can do if they see any adverse effects of it, which I think is the key that probably has been missed in other areas. I don't know if Ambrose wants to talk about other regions. Apologies, I know that was quite Leeds-centric.
Ambrose?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Councillor Groves. Just to go back over what's been said, there's been a tranche 1 of this emergency active travel funding released by government with an indicative allocation that we were required to apply for, and the final allocation rested on the strength of our application and the level of ambition. So we made that application in June, and this is for, as Councillor Carlisle said, temporary or trial measures that could be rapidly deployed. So we were successful with our application, securing 100% of that initial indicative allocation of around £2.5 million. And some authorities in the country didn't received half of their allocation. A small number received more than their allocation. We didn't secure all the funding we applied for. We actually applied for a greater level of funding, reflecting our ambition in the region. But we've been successful in securing what we expected, if you like. I think Councillor Groves has already identified the timescales being very challenging. Government are pushing authorities, I think, very hard to act fast, given the urgency of the current situation with coronavirus. And the timescales are very challenging to make the application, and they're very challenging to deliver the schemes. I think there has been some early implementation in some districts, and Councillor Carlisle has mentioned some of that in Leeds, and I think that is in part in response to the situation around local economies changing. For example, when shops were allowed to reopen in mid-June, that was a point where authorities felt the need to create space to allow safe shopping within town centres. So since we got the notification of the outcome of our application, we've been working with the 5 partner councils to prioritise our original programme to fit the funding that we've been allocated, and we've completed that and agreed what a prioritised programme would be with portfolio holders from the partner councils in agreement, and we're looking to publish the list of schemes in tranche 1 next week to confirm what that will be, along with an explanatory press notice. So we'll have those details available soon. But just on the timescales, there is tremendous pressure, if you like, with sort of 8 to 12 weeks available to start work and complete. And although they are temporary or trial measures, and so relatively easy to construct, if you like, compared to a permanent scheme, there's still a huge amount of work happening in all of the local authorities to design and plan these schemes, and try and meet the government's requirements in terms of ambition to create safe space for walking and cycling, and meet those timescales. Hopefully that's a useful update.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambrose. So we've just got a couple of more questions. So just try and get the cycling ones together. So we've got James Craig, who, yes, we are pleased about the funding from the DAFT for the feasibility study of the Queensbury Tunnel. It would be the longest cycling tunnel, I think, in Europe, or if not global, if that came off. So that's the answer to that one. Just on cycling and walking for the other districts, obviously there's a lot of cycling and walking in the Transforming City schemes. We've recruited 30 people because obviously some authorities are better resourced than others, so that will accelerate that work. Leeds and Bradford have been able to get their own interactive map on cycling, so WYCA have helped with the Wakefield, Kirklees and Calderdale map, and we've had some really good feedback on that from the public for cycling and walking. So next we have got, there are no peak buses at now. I usually know if one bus misses, so I'm not sure that we haven't taken away peak time buses to an extent. Charlotte, and concessionary bus passes. About David, do you want to pick this up in terms of the disability?
Yes, I've seen that question, and I understand the point that's been made. The English National Concessionary Fare Scheme concession that is available is available for people over retirement age and people with disabilities, and generally, and it is a generalisation. I fully get that. So there are people who mostly aren't going to work. Fully accept that there are some older people who go to work, and there are quite a lot of people with disabilities who also work and are active in the economy, who would save a lot of money if we made it free for them before 9 o'clock. I think the question really, if we were to recommend free travel or reduced cost travel for people before 9:30, then obviously we need to do a full evaluation of the cost and value of doing that, and against the fact that if people are travelling to work, then obviously they're economically active. So it's quite a tricky one, this, and so we have looked at it over the years in terms of whether or not we should offer a concessionary fare for holders of that pass before 9:30. We can continue to look at that. But anything to do with concessionary fares comes with a high price tag, and we'd have to justify the business case for that against other priorities as well. So I fully understand the point that's being made. I fully understand that my answer isn't particularly satisfactory, particularly to those people who would like to be able to use their bus pass before 9:30. But hopefully it gives you a fairly sort of genuine answer to that question.
Just to give you some reassurance, it's something that politically we all really empathise with, and that work and costings, along with the WASPI women that have contacted us. We've done some desktop work, obviously with devolution, obviously happening next year. So I have got Brannock.
Hi, yeah, I think you briefly touched on it for a second about the interactive map that was set up across West Yorkshire. I was just wondering what the criteria, the process for approving different, approving like what things would go on there is, so how you select which one will happen and which one won't, and also if that will continue like post the pandemic.
Yeah, Ambrose, do you want to come in on that one?
Thanks, Chair. Have I frozen? Oh, okay.
No.
So we had plans to launch a map like this as part of our longer term planning work, and I think with the COVID-19 crisis, we decided to accelerate those and launch in line with a number of authorities across the country. You may have seen that those kind of maps being launched by other authorities and cities. we wanted people to be able to identify what issues they were experiencing, especially now that we have issues with social distancing and insufficient pedestrian space, as examples, as well as queuing outside shops, creating points of pressure. So there was a desire to allow people to provide the information quickly and provide officers within the district councils with intelligence from the ground when earlier in lockdown, the sort of site visits that you might have taken in the past were more challenging. And we're really glad with the response rates. We hope to increase the number of people that are commenting and get more people enabled to provide their views. The map that we've launched, it covers Calderdale, Kirklees and Wakefield, as Councillor Groves said. Bradford have launched their own map, and Councillor Carlisle mentioned that Leeds also launched their own platform a little earlier. Our map is designed to enable people to provide information on the issues they face and some of the measures they would like to see. It's not designed to act as a point where it's a list of schemes that can then be delivered, and we tried to set out the purpose in the information surrounding the map. So it will inform our district council's views on where the priorities are and what measures need to be taken to develop schemes in the future. And as we look to the next round of funding under the emergency funding, we can use that information and the districts can use that information. But there isn't a process to review every single comment and provide a response. And providing a comment can't guarantee action will be taken on that particular comment. We need to use it as information. In terms of timescales, in discussion with Councillor Groves earlier on, we felt it was important that when this map was launched, that especially earlier in lockdown when movement was more restricted, it be available for a period where people are freer to move around. And although restrictions are being lifted, perhaps quicker than we originally envisaged, we do want to make sure that people are able to use that platform when I won't use the phrase back to normal, but when conditions settle down more. So we haven't put a time limit on it as such at the moment, but we'll be considering at what points we take the information and where we need to take it next. However, Leeds and Bradford are using their own platforms in not necessarily in the same way. So at the moment, it's providing information for our partner councils. Hopefully that's useful.
Yeah, I thought it was like a really good idea of like direct democracy. So thanks for clarifying that. Sounds good.
Good. Councillor Taj Salam, who is the District Chair of Bradford, would like to speak. Councillor Salam.
Thanks, Kim. I mean, there has been a number of questions that have actually arisen regarding buses and active travel. I think, there's more and more active travel has actually been, which is a good thing. And but at the same time, if we are talking about the transport modes, then buses are actually really, really crucial. And, to get the passengers back on the buses is going to take some time. However, I think we as an organization and the operators can actually do a bit more, which is to make sure that people are actually confident to come back to buses. I mean, for us, I know the operators are actually now using materials and substances that can actually stay on the surface for nearly 27 to 30 days, which is called Zono 71, Z71, which is a good thing, which actually then gives people confidence that anything that, you know what I mean, they're actually traveling on, especially on the bus, that is safe to do so with face masks. And also, however, what concerns me also is that now the opportunity is there for drivers to be tested. Especially, I mean, in Bradford, I'm talking about Bradford Council has actually now asked if we want all our drivers to be tested. And I think we should actually do that. As a West Yorkshire Combined Authority, we should actually talk to the operators to get drivers tested, for the reason that people who are coming on the bus know that the drivers are being tested. And if anybody's positive, they're not going to be allowed to drive. The other thing was that earlier on, early running was actually mentioned, and the bus is running early. I can assure you that, you know what I mean, operators are actually very, very serious about this, because they don't like buses running early. There are timing points that we have to actually adhere to in between. And then there is also intermediate timing points that we have to adhere to. So, you know, it is very, very highly unlikely that bus is going to run before the time is actually being allocated to. And in between timing points, there's only 15-minute gap. And then there's intermediate timing points in between there. Martin's question about idling, I know that most of our drivers switch the buses off now. And then there is a mechanism of the bus switching itself off after 4 minutes. So I can assure you, you know, the buses have actually, or has been designed to switch itself off. However, if you are in a remote area where there could be a danger if the bus stops and then you can't start it again, then there may be a problem that the driver actually keeps the bus running, because there might be only 2 or 3 minutes waiting time over there. So I can assure. Now, the only thing that and I'm really sorry that I actually joined the meeting about 6-7 minutes late, because so I didn't hear from Dave's presentation about school buses, because now I'm informed through the council and other sources that there is no restriction of how many kids can actually, you know what I mean, how many kids we can carry on the bus. I would be opposed to any kids standing on the bus. But at the same time, we've got to also, because if we are carrying sixth formers, they're adults. Young kids maybe not be prone to the disease, but there are other people, you know, sixth formers and others that may be adults. So I just wanted to hear again, Dave, what you said about this. I know you said the registration can be done on West Yorkshire Combined Authority website, but is that only the ones that we're running, or is it the operators also?
Yeah, just to clarify Councillor Salam's question. What the government guidance says is that a dedicated school bus, in other words, a bus that only has pupils going to that school, does not need to comply with social distancing requirements. A public bus still does. So one of the things we do need to do is be aware of and understand the number of pupils who travel on public bus services, so that we can duplicate the appropriate trips to make sure that we're not creating a dangerous or an overloaded situation. So that's broadly what the guidance says, and that's what we're working to. I do get that that's a little bit of a complicated picture for everybody to get their head around. It took us a while to get our head around it, but that's basically what the government has said. So that's what we're working to. There will be some commercial school services that actually become dedicated school services to be able to work within this particular requirement. So and that's the sort of detail we're working through with bus operators and schools at the moment. So hopefully that clarifies. I think I would just add one further thing to what Councillor Salam has said right at the beginning of that as well. I think, and what somebody had said in the chat as well, in terms of incentives for people to go back onto bus and trains. I think the biggest incentive to get people back on buses and trains is for them to feel safe and confident. And I think the work that Councillor Salam's just mentioned, and some of the other things that are happening at the moment, is to make people feel confident enough that a bus or a train is not a place where they're at specific risk of catching the virus. And I think that's the challenge. And in a few minutes' time, our colleague Richard is going to talk you through a survey that I think illustrates that particular point.
Yeah, Councillor Salam mentioned the pilot of the drivers being tested in Bradford. I believe it's a pilot that Councillor Hinchcliffe is leading on. So we're just waiting for more details on that. Can't emphasise the amount of work that has gone on. I don't know if Steve Wainwright is on the call, contacting every single school in West Yorkshire and still not having any funding from the government to actually look at getting more buses into the system if needed. The operators are doing their own work behind the scenes, but it's really challenging is the school transport stuff. As you know, SEN as well will come into that. So yeah, the team are doing everything they can in the background, and there'll be more communications coming out this week. But yeah, we probably could do with about another 130 vehicles in total.
Just to say, sorry, Kim.
It's fine.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I was asking the local authority and Susan to actually allow people without symptoms as drivers to be tested, but they were a bit hesitant to do that. Now that we've got these pilots in Bradford, because of the number of high rates that we had, we were second in the country. Now we've gone to 4th or 5th. So now they've actually given that opportunity. What it does is it just gives passengers a bit more confidence, because a passenger may be traveling on the bus for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, where the driver is there for 3 hours, 4 hours, you know, and so therefore, if people know that the drivers have been tested and they are negative, and it just gives that confidence back, because attracting the passengers back, and it's not just about having safe environment, Dave, but it's also, there's got to be some incentives to make sure that the passengers actually come back to our buses, because, you know, buses in West Yorkshire or in the whole of the country are very crucial to our economy and to jobs. So therefore, you know, I mean, that's what I was trying to say.
Absolutely, and we do not want everybody getting into cars after we've had such fantastic air quality during this period. So we're doing everything we can, Councillor Salam, and you're preaching to the converted. We're all behind you and trying to do what we can. It's really interesting that people can get in a taxi, maybe several people throughout that day. Yeah. And there've been no guidelines, so it's an interesting one. I'm going to keep going with the questions because this is a session for people. So even if that means, you know, we have to come back to a different meeting and agenda, I think it's really important that people get their questions answered. So Brandon has answered the question that there will be more electric bus routes from first. Andy Noble is asking, so we've got operators, bus and rail on the line. What promotional offers are bus and rail operators going to do to get people back on their services? Really good question. So I'm looking to, Andrew, do you want to start off, and maybe the rail operators might come in, because I know you're doing a lot of work with operators on what tickets and fares might look like in the future, Andrew Bradley? Or do one of the operators want to come in?
Yeah. No, I can come in very quickly and then hand over to operators. I think the key thing is actually just reflecting the change in travel habits, and some of that's been captured by the earlier comments saying that there is no peak at the minute. And I think the question really that we have ongoing is are things going to return to how they were, or are we going to have a new normal, to coin a phrase? And I think the reality is, what we're picking up from across the board is that a lot of people who were travelling into offices and workplaces 5 days a week by public transport are potentially not going to be doing that moving forward. And I know that the rail industry is looking at this, and we also, from the perspective of the West Yorkshire Ticketing Company, are looking at how we can enhance and change and modify our range of tickets quickly to better meet the needs of the travelling public, and to make public transport attractive to people at the right time when capacity is there to do so. So just specifically on the rail, I'm aware that there is a trial of a flexi season ticket proposition on the line, the Northern Line between Harrogate and Leeds, and that's ongoing, and that's with a view to that being rolled out further. But I'll hand over to any operators, or Dave may wish to say something about that.
So we've got Paul Turner from Transdev who's going to come in. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Groves. I mean, just to follow up to Andrew's point of view, we've done some research of customers around their likely sort of future attitudes to different tickets. There's a lot of interest in more flexible packaging of tickets, so that you don't necessarily have to buy a monthly ticket or a weekly ticket on there. We will say, generally speaking, weekly tickets are still the best for people travelling 4 days a week, because they tend to be priced around 3.8, 3.9 times a day ticket on there, as opposed to 5 times. But we've seen an increase in interest in multi-journey tickets, or what we call the bundles of day tickets. So you can buy 5 or 10 day tickets in a batch and use them when you need to. We've rolled that out. We tried some of those in Keighley sometime during 2019. We launched it. We've now rolled that out across the rest of the network, and they're starting to pick up. So in terms of making sure we've got the products people want to buy available, I think we're there now. In terms of promotion and encouraging people back, it's very much talking to individual groups of customers through different channels. So we can make sure those who, for example, are customers of M-Card, the multi-operator ticketing scheme, where we've got ability to contact them, we can potentially do welcome back offers on there on ticketing. Some people have got frozen products on their cards that we want to encourage them back. Similarly, with tickets on mobile apps, we can offer people sort of encouragements to come back. I think the biggest apologies, I forget who it was who said the comment before. It might even have been Dave. The best promotion is building people's confidence and building people's trust. Thankfully, we are getting a lot of feedback from customers who are coming back, that they are feeling it is safe and clean and reassuring, which is welcoming. We aren't getting many people coming back saying it's turning them off and scared. So hopefully we are collectively as an industry working well. I think there is a role for West Yorkshire as a whole to take a view on how we promote public transport again, and make sure we're all saying the same sort of message, and all making sure we get that across through our individual and collective channels. And I'm sure we'll have many conversations over that over the next few months.
Okay, any more questions and comments before I close this session? No, thank you so much for that. That was really interactive and really useful. And so I'm going to hand over to Dave Pearson, who's going to take us through the rest of the agenda. So we're going to have to be quick, Dave, because we have just got under an hour left. You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was doing well. I haven't done that for a whole hour.
No.
I'll quickly hand over to our colleague Richard Dale. We've done a survey, and lots of the things that Richard's going to tell us we've probably already identified as to people's views and attitudes. And then after Richard's been through the survey, then our colleague Helen Ellerton is going to give you the shape of our transport recovery plan and get your views. And in many respects, we've started teasing out some of those points in the conversations we've just been having. So Richard, if you're able to take the reins in terms of talking us through your presentation.
Yeah, sure. I do have some slides to go through, so I'm assuming I need to share my screen, so just bear with me. I can't share my screen apparently. It says the host has disabled participant screen sharing. So that might be a bit of a stumbling block.
Right, you can now.
They look familiar. Right, so do I have the ability to navigate through these?
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Sorry, this is me that's put this up. If you you won't have control of this. If you just tell me when you want to move on to the next page,
All right,
I'll do
cool.
that for you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Right. In that case, I will make a start. So, hello everyone. My name is Richard Dale. I'm the Transport Analytics Lead in the Research and Intelligence team at the Combined Authority. So I'm going to give you a summary of the key findings from the recent COVID-19 travel survey, which we did over the telephone. It was a survey that was undertaken in early June, immediately prior to the general retail reopening. And we specified the survey to have 700 respondents across West Yorkshire. This was wave 1 of 4 surveys, but I'll come on to that a little bit later. So just to set the scene, perhaps unusually, the first slide that I'll show you doesn't actually have any survey data in it, but bear with me, there is a reason for showing it. So this explains why we've commissioned the survey. So this type of data that you can see is all operational information, and it's all volumetric quantitative data, meaning that it tells you a lot of what is happening. So this particular chart, as an example, shows the drop-off in demand for various transport services that Research and Intelligence monitor, and then a gradual recovery. But what it doesn't tell you is why these patterns have changed, what users think of the services they're accessing, what people might want, and also how people might expect to act in the near future. So while this information itself is very valuable, a survey like the one we've commissioned adds another layer on top of that. It gives you a level of insight that you don't get from the numbers alone. And the telephone survey in particular gives you the advantage of being able to determine the number of respondents and also ensuring that the results are demographically representative of the population of West Yorkshire. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So these are now actual survey results. So one of the priorities of the survey was to understand how walking, running, and cycling has changed through the lockdown period. So looking at the chart in the top left corner, we found high proportions of people were reporting walking or running more than they were before lockdown, 39%, and 35% said they were cycling more. A relatively small proportion said that they were doing less in both cases. The chart in the bottom right corner shows some of the reasons given for this increase in walking, running, or cycling, where people said that they were doing more. The main reason by quite some way was for leisure or exercise. There was also quite a lot of people getting involved in activity because they had more time available. That sparked some discussion within the team because it might suggest that there's a more proactive motivation behind this rather than merely avoiding other modes, for example. So the implication could be that some of these behaviors might have the potential to stick. So that was a fairly interesting one to us. If we move on to the next slide. So this was one of the core ones from my perspective. So we asked people what their main modes of transport were for several different purposes before lockdown. And then there's 3 charts on here, and this is the lighter color in the charts. And we asked them what they expected they would use for the same purpose in the coming weeks. And that's the darker color next to it. So there's the different modes across the bottom of each chart. So taking the first one, for work trips, there's a notable decrease comparing before and after in public transport use, both bus and train, with slight increases in car use and walking. Some of this will be affected by increases in working from home, which is why you might not necessarily be seeing large increases to offset the decreases in other modes. Travelling into city centres, there was, again, a big decrease on bus and train usage, or intention to use bus and train rather. This time though, there's a large increase in intention to use the car. For local grocery shopping, interestingly, there was a decline in car use and an increase in walking alongside a slight decrease in bus use. So suggesting that people doing local shopping trips are walking to their local shops a lot more. If we could move on to the next slide. Thank you. So this was a similar question but asked in a different way, not necessarily around specific purposes, but trying to get a general feel for what people are likely to do in future. The results show a similar pattern to the purpose-specific results on the previous slide, in that public transport usage is expected to reduce. Notably, there's an increase in active modes, particularly in walking. Another conclusion that we drew from this was that shopping online and working from home are expected to become more popular in future. People indicated that they were going to do it more than they did before lockdown. Move on to the next slide, please. So to focus in on the changes in car use, because this is of a particular concern, most respondents expected a similar level of use to what they do now. However, if you start to drill down into the detail a little bit, we did pick up that overall 28% expect to use the car less in the coming weeks. However, public transport users are likely to use the car more compared to non-public transport users, which makes sense if you consider the potential for mode shift. So if we move on to the next slide, please. We then asked people who said they would travel by bus or train less, what they're intending to do instead. 59% said they would simply travel less, whereas 31% said they would change to another mode altogether instead of using public transport. And then on to the next slide, please. So in the top chart, we were asking if people are likely to change the times that they commute to see if people would be aiming to avoid the main peaks or otherwise change their habits. Most respondents were not likely to make changes to their habits in terms of the times they commute. However, younger people and public transport users were more likely to change their commuting times. So that would suggest there might be some widening of any peaks if things settle down, as Ambrose said, among public transport users and younger people. Finally, we asked people how they found working from home. Overall, 64% of people said that in the long term, they're likely to work more from home in the future. That's across the very likely and likely categories. So that's considering, so this is just a quick overview of some of the key points. If we just move on to the next slide. So these results, as I said, they were collected in early June, just before there was some substantial rule changes around retail. So they're reaching their best before date at the minute. We are, however, currently working on telephone wave 2, and also we performed an online survey where we asked similar questions, but in more detail, so we weren't limited by time. We got many more respondents. To wave 1, we had about 2,200 responses. And we are looking to present these results in the coming weeks. We're also intended to compare wave 2 to wave 1 to see how opinions have changed through the various rule changes that have occurred. Following this, there's going to be 2 further waves of telephone surveys and a second wave of online surveys, and they'll all be compared. The disadvantage of the online survey is that it is not necessarily representative demographically, and it is biased towards public transport users because of the nature that the survey was advertised. So finally, there's a few links at the end that might be of interest. Internal colleagues could access our SharePoint library. That's not as useful if you're external. The full results are available online on the Combined Authority website. It's a PDF format with, there's much more detail in there, and there's also much more analysis, including diving into the detail of any trends by things such as age, working status, demographics, all that kind of thing. My team, the Research and Intelligence team, produce fortnightly alternating transport and economics briefings to track these kinds of trends through the current time period, along with a weekly dashboard. And we're able to produce any ad hoc analysis on request if needed. So those are the end of the slides. That was a very quick run through. Considering how we are for time, I'm happy either way to try and take any questions now or take them offline, or if anyone wants to do the latter, the email address on screen is the best way to get in touch with the Research and Intelligence team. But I'll pause there for the minute.
Councillor Groves, is it worth us moving straight to Helen's presentation, and then we can take questions on all of it?
You're on mute, Councillor Groves. Sorry about that.
Do you want to do your presentation, and then we can.
Do you just want to go ahead, Helen?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Again, then, could I have the slides up, please? And Ben, it'll be the version that I shared with you latest.
This is the latest version. Can everyone see it all right on the screen?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. So I'm Helen Elton. I look after the bus policy mainly as a policy manager in our policy and strategy and comms directorate. We, as Councillor Groves has said and as Dave Pearson has said, we have been drafting together a transport recovery plan that sits within the economic recovery plan. Both will be presented at the Combined Authority at the end of the month. Essentially, the transport recovery plan, or the aim of the transport recovery plan, is to draw together kind of the role of transport through the restart and into recovery, and what is needed to ensure sort of transport can effectively and efficiently perform its role.
Could you put this into full slide view, please? You've got it on. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. There's quite a lot of words on all of these coming slides, for which I apologise, but hopefully what I can do is just summarise the content here, and then we can have a bit of a discussion. The Transport Recovery Plan is set into 3 timeframes, so we've kind of named them, if you like, so rescue, reimagine and resilience. And in short, the idea is that the rescue timeframe, the shorter term, is around what can we do now to make sure that we can restore confidence, that we can make our environment safe for people to use and people to travel as they need to. The reimagining is making sure that we can sort of set the aspiration for the future and essentially adapt the transport network to kind of meet the changes in travel behaviour, and particularly picking up on some of the things Richard's presented in his slides. And then finally, the resilience phrase is kind of basically making sure that we future-proof our transport network so that we have a sustainable transport network that can serve the needs of the population in the future and make sure we're resilient for any future pandemics. Within that, we set 4 sort of priority areas, and these, as you might expect, are around, firstly, around public transport, ticketing information, walking and cycling, and road travel. So these priority areas are all making sure that we take some short-term actions and then some longer-term actions as well to meet the rescue, the reimagine and the resilience themes. Okay, so essentially the following slides, I've set out on each side the policy priorities and then the short-term actions. And then at the end, we've got a few questions just to start a bit of a discussion, depending on how much time. So Ben, would you mind moving on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So these next slides are all modal as well, so you'll just have to bear with me a little bit. So the first kind of policy priority area is around supporting our bus passengers, and the actions, the short-term actions are shown there as well. But essentially our policy priorities have sort of 4 areas. First, kind of providing sort of passengers with a safe travelling environment, which is sort of in accordance with government guidance, but also minimises the risk of virus transmission in the future going forward. And then, and also then rebuilding our bus network and developing a sustainable funding model around working with our bus operators to kind of restore patronage and service levels, but also making sure we have transparency of the operating costs, public sector fundings and revenues, to make sure that we can make sure that the public sector money is value for money, and also that we have a bus network that meets the needs of all our customers. And then lastly on there, which is just picking up on the financial equilibrium, around ensuring that we have value for money for our public sector contribution, and that's making sure that the emergency funding now, but also tendered services going forward. So you can see some of the short-term actions there around communications and around physical measures, but also making sure that we can rebuild the bus network in a way forward that is sustainable. Okay, next slide, please. So then the second theme in there is around supporting our rail passengers. And again, we've got a number of policy priorities and short-term actions, but essentially we're wanting to work with rail operators to ensure the rail services cater as far as possible for increasing passenger numbers in the region, with social distancing and other safety measures in place, as well as making sure that as demand returns, we're securing commitment from government to ensure that we can invest in the local railways and make sure that we have a railway network, again, that works for our customers. And the Williams Review is also playing into that. Again, so essentially also working closely with Transport for the North and ensuring that, and our industry partners, to ensure that we kind of support opportunities to build back a better rail network. Next slide, please. And so then the kind of the next area around ticketing and information offer, and this area is obviously cross-cutting across all of public transport. But essentially, again, our policy priorities there, focusing on ticketing and information and the short-term actions. We, working with our sort of our West Yorkshire TICO, we're seeking to restore a customer base and revenues on the M card and multimodal ticketing range, making sure that our tickets can adapt to changing behaviour and changing kind of travel patterns going forward. And also making sure that we can making sure that we can increase the number of flexible ticketing options to allow for more flexibility in travel patterns in the future. We're also keen to ensure that we focus on affordability and flexibility of bus travel, for example, for under 25s, and introducing our Fair Deal for Young People, which was approved by Transport Committee in February 2020. The challenge is obviously around timing of introducing that in relation to social distancing on buses. Also, we would like to work with the credit union sector and respective government agencies to adapt payment technologies to support passengers without bank accounts, job seekers, and those sort of facing mobility challenges. And then also enhancing live transport information, which we've had a bit of conversation about that today, to enable passengers to understand sort of levels of bus occupancy before boarding. And some of you may have seen First's app around this, and it's kind of expanding some of that to make sure to try and get a greater coverage across the network. And also working with app providers on multimodal journey planning and reviewing the options for pre-bookable transport. So, for example, demand responsive transport, and understanding the place of those types of transport in a full integrated transport system going forward. And then the next slide, please. Okay, so then the enabling and encouraging people to walk and cycle. Essentially, our policy priorities on there in the short term is around delivering the emergency active travel funding, and then going forward, and both is tranche 1 and tranche 2, and going forward we try and integrate the behaviour change. So see kind of making sure that we capture the experiences when travelling by bike or on foot, to suggest where improvements could be made as well to make journeys safer. And crucially, really, securing longer term investment in cycling and walking infrastructure and engagement activities to start maximise the government's active travel funding, and making sure we make a sustained case for increasing walking and cycling funding across the region. And then in the next slide, please. And then reducing the impact on road travel and making sure that we reduce our emissions from road travel and improving road safety, but also we communicate the fact that there are sustainable travel options available in the short term, and that people don't just automatically jump to their cars when they can no longer, or they don't feel they can currently travel by bus or by rail. And also within that, therefore, so ensuring that we support the sustainable movement of goods, and making sure our road network is still resilient, given there is likely to be an increase in car trips in the shorter term. And our mobility hub proposals, making sure that they are integrated to provide kind of a range of sustainable travel options, so people feel they have access to and options to choose from in a sustainable travel environment, not necessarily just automatically go into their cars. Next slide, please. Okay, and I guess just before we go on to talk about this, before we just go and talk about this, you'll see that there are quite a few cross-cutting themes, I guess, putting sort of speak around kind of carbon and inclusive growth. And as we set out, as you'll have seen on the plan on a page, if you like, that was at the start of these slides, making sure that we kind of come back in a state with sustainable travel as the key, and with a low carbon and inclusive network is really important. And that's one of the things that we are trying to really make sure that happens through this recovery plan. So just on that, we are then therefore saying that to help us make this recovery plan happen, we do need some government asks to enable us to deliver this. And a number of those around kind of making sure that we have a greater local kind of control and kind of outcomes on both in the public transport area, but also kind of making sure that we can access, which we've been successful in doing so far, is the emergency active travel funding and the tranche 1, and then the tranche 2 to follow. Okay, that's been a whistle-stop tour for which I apologise. The next slide has some some initial questions, which these are just to start discussion. But as I say, I appreciate how we kind of integrate this and with Richard's presentation as well, and whether you want to just ask the questions or put them in the chat. Councillor Groves, I'll go back to you if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. If we can just take the slides down, I think we've got some questions in the chat. There's been a lot around the slides, and we'll get the slides out as soon as possible to everyone. Obviously, the recovery plan is part of a bigger document that will be going to the Combined Authority, but we'll circulate everything as soon as possible. So, questions and comments for Helen? Anybody raising the hand for any questions? I do appreciate that was a whistle-stop tour of quite a big agenda, and the recovery will probably go on for a couple of years, I feel, rather than a couple of months. So any questions or comments? Wesley, are you wanting to come in there, or Wesley Webb?
Yeah, I mean, I've asked on the chat whether perhaps one of the limbs of this whole exercise should be actually sort of trying to stop people travelling. I mean, in the future, I mean, I see a world where people may not need to travel quite so much or so far because the services they need locally are better and more accessible to them. The areas they live in are comfortable and nice places to be, and the number of times they need to venture out are sort of more limited than they are now. I'm not sure, this may not be for WYCA to do this, but it does seem to be the way, you know, the world will work better in the future, simply by more proximity, more services and facilities closer to home.
Councillor Groves, I think it's a really good point, and in some respects, the pandemic has actually done a massive experiment like that, that we're actually working through at the moment. So to a certain extent, the fact that it's actually reducing people making journeys is overall is part of that. And I think what to sort of respond to that point is, and I think what the plan is seeking to do is actually adapt that into the way going forward, and that has lots of consequences. But I think one of the things that we do see is that people have been reluctant to make journeys and may be reluctant for some time to come. So I think it's a really interesting observation, and in a way we're almost living through this as an experiment in all of our lives.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the rail industry and electrification and all the big schemes that we've mentioned, they are part of the carbon agenda as well. So we have to desperately get people back onto public transport and convince them that it is safe to do so. I think I've got a question from Councillor Salam.
Well, not much of a question, a bit of a comment, to be honest with you, Kim. I mean, early on in the slides, there were 4 areas that Helen actually highlighted in the plan, and that was ensuring passenger safety and confidence. I think that is the most crucial one, and then rebuilding the bus network. I mean, we've never talked about passenger safety and confidence because they've always been safe and confident to pre-COVID-19. But rebuilding the bus network, we've always talked about that, and I think that's crucial to actually keep it on the agenda. Developing a sustainable funding model, that is also crucial because money is going to be tight. You know, the current government funding is not going to last forever. And then ensuring value for money for public sector contributions. That is also going to come up at some point where we will be asked for accountability. So those 4 areas, in my view, are actually very crucial. But at the moment, the first one, ensuring passenger safety and confidence, because safety is there, it's the confidence that we need to rebuild back into the public transport. Because, you know, the survey goes on and then, you know, people are saying that they're less and less likely to use bus for some time. So a lot of work has to be done around that. I know the plan is asking about devolution and devolved funding contributions and everything else. But the confidence in the public transport is the most crucial for me. And I think we've got to emphasize on that more and more in the coming months and maybe a year. Thanks, Kim.
I think the government are giving mixed messages. So they're in one sense, you know, we've got to social distance, but in the next breath saying that every school child is going to go back to school on a bus with no social distancing measures. So there's quite a mixed message there. I have got a question, Helen. Somebody put it on the chat. Let me see who it was. What does long-term resilience mean?
So we're kind of trying to focus sort of within this plan specifically, because this plan is not, I should say, not kind of overriding other transport strategies. So we have our West Yorkshire Transport Strategy, for example, which goes to 2040. This is our kind of recovery plan for transport that fits into that. So resilience, we're saying in there, the time frame is sort of 2 to 5 years, and making sure that what we, you know, deliver either through funding pots that we have, transforming cities, for example, so capital funding, but also kind of other fundings we make sure that devolution, for example, we make sure that what we build in here has the resilience in there, that we can have a sustainable travel network, but also make sure that if anything, happens in the future, again, we're a bit better prepared.
And there was a question about walking and cycling being kept separate. But I suppose in the mix with that, we could basically say, how are we going to make sure that we work with authorities to have priority bus corridors as well as walking and cycling corridors? And will government give funding for maintenance for walking and cycling? Because we've put a lot of cycling tracks in the past, but there's no future maintenance fund for those schemes. Any more questions or comments for Andy Dewsbury?
I was interested in the demand responsive element you were talking about, and I'd like to know a bit more about that, because I think, to me, that's probably key. If we can tailor the vehicles we send out to exactly what people need, that answers the environmental questions, the economic questions, the congestion questions, sort of all in one go. And, the old method of standing by a post on the road at a certain time of day as a means of communication just seemed very Victorian. I'm sure we can do far better these days. So at some point, I'd like to know a lot more about what's envisaged with that. I think that is quite critical.
So DRT is part of our considerations around future kind of mobility and trying to integrate, and part of our consideration around how best to make sure we still provide, we have a bus service that can meet the needs going forward, and DRT is very much the plan in that. We're looking at doing some trials of DRT and in the shorter term, and that might help us shape it going forward, and looking at what's happened previously in sort of Merseyside and other places. So kind of making sure that we apply those principles, but kind of having that flexible bus service to try and support or kind of add to, if you like, our core bus services is one way we feel we can offer a wider public transport offer.
Yeah, I'd just add to what Helen said, that technology allows you to send to call up a bus when you need it, like you can a taxi or a private hire vehicle. And so operating shared buses on that basis is a definite option, particularly in rural areas and areas where the demand isn't quite as strong. So that's broadly what we would look to do in those sort of areas. In terms of, it isn't a cheap option, and we'll need to keep the cost in mind because of the unit price. It's less dense in terms of number of people using it, so we need to keep that in mind as well. But it's definitely got a role to play, and we've seen the growth of rideshare apps in recent years as being the sort of thing people want, and we've got to adapt public transport to that.
I would say I'm like you, Andy. I need to know a lot more about it yet. And obviously there's been trials up and down the country, and how successful are they? And is there an audience to actually engage in it at this time, so that we're actually spending the public purse wisely? I think we've got Transdev on the call who, they actually service an employment site in I think it's in Bury. I know it's Boohoo, I know it's Vermoose, which works really well because they've got a market there, and then Arriva Click in Liverpool. Understanding more about what they've done and the modal shift on that from people in cars, because I think it's got a future. It's what does that future look like? And I think it's something that actually in a total transport plan, if you think of the money that all local authorities spend on passenger transport to hospitals and places like that, I think there's a bigger deep dive that we need to do into DRT, if I'm honest, to get it absolutely right. Because from what I've been reading up and down the country, it's not been as successful and it's been quite expensive. So we need to really look at it deeper. So we need to know more. I think I've got Councillor Salam who wants to come in on that as well.
Sorry, just go back to what you said about the cycling and active travel. I mean, people are actually being the cycling champion for local authority. I do get comments from certain people, and where there's been an increase in cycling, some of our greenways and towpaths have actually been criticised for the condition that they're in. We took a group of people just to show them the Leeds and Liverpool Canal going towards Silsden, and to be honest with you, some of them were on road bikes, and they are absolutely unsuitable for road bikes. So we had to go back onto the road, because otherwise people were just going to be get punctures and damage the bikes. So I think we need to look at that if we're going to actually be encouraging active travel, especially cycling and walking. The other thing was the e-scooters have also been discussed, because the current shared spaces between the pedestrians and cyclists is not enough. And if we get scooters on there, then that's going to actually even more be detrimental to especially the pedestrians.
Okay. We've got one question about a parking levy, the business parking levy. I'm taking it this is a Nottingham model, that where the money, the revenue that comes from that is reinvested into their transport system.
Yes, it is, yes.
I think it's something that we've looked at Leeds and keep revisiting at Leeds. I think at this moment in time, the current climate, as people are struggling, may be quite difficult, but I think it's something that we wouldn't rule out. I think there's pros and cons against this. So when it first started, the companies, the organisations actually paid the levy, and for every 10 parking spaces that they had cars coming into the city centre. That, as it's progressed on, the actual levy has been passed down to their individual employees. So again, it's something that you have to look into before and get a good understanding of before you introduce. But I can obviously congestion, the parking levy helps congestion. It drives people onto public transport. I would hope that when we get a mass rapid transit system, by all vehicles, that actually that's something that will drive revenue for us, because the problem that we've got at West Yorkshire Combined Authority, we're one of the only authorities in the whole of the country that does not have its own revenue stream to invest back in transport or borrow against. So we've got quite a lot of challenges. Any more questions on that anyone wants to ask? Somebody said, can we promote walking and cycling to avoid main highway routes? We do have green and blue corridors on cycling and walking on the canal towpaths, things like the Castleford Greenway, and there's lots of those across West Yorkshire. I think that's probably why we need to get more information out about the schemes that we have. We've got some amazing schemes across West Yorkshire for walking and cycling. What plans have we got to raise money locally through the people of West Yorkshire and through business of West Yorkshire? We cannot rely on government alone. Yeah, I think that's a really good question, a big question. Something that I think, we're always looking at public-private partnership, and we do that in our schemes. One of the Transforming Cities schemes has to have developer contributions, and some new stations have to have developer contributions. So we do that type of work. I suppose maybe Andy Noble, do you want to explain that question a bit further? You're talking about a levy when we have the mayoral transport levy?
Yeah, it's just, I know like in London, a lot of their revenue is generated through business that they have on their stations and,
right.
the system. And I know obviously all their councils, part of their council tax is to give to public transport. So I think the time has come now that the people of West Yorkshire, if they want a decent transport system, either through business or through the public themselves, they need to pay for it. And as it stands at the moment, obviously that we're not paying enough because we're not getting a decent system.
Councillor Gross, I'll probably explain a little bit of what happens now, in the sense that the council taxpayers of West Yorkshire do contribute to what the combined authority provides through something called the transport levy, and where we can, we do supplement that with rents from shops in bus stations and that sort of thing. I think, as Councillor Grove said, when the authority becomes a mayoral authority next year, then it has some more freedoms and flexibilities to bring to play that it hasn't at the moment. But I think, going back to your final point, then to a certain extent, that's to be determined by yourselves as the electorate and by the councillors and ultimately the mayor, as to where money needs to be channeled, because there's lots and lots of priorities, and coming out of the COVID situation even more. So but in very many aspects, what you get now is a function of a contribution of local taxpayers in contributions and the commercial revenue that we can raise.
I think transport is fundamental to the recovery of the economy, and we've got to invest in it. And it's crucial to us achieving the environmental targets. It's really something that, if you're looking at a number one factor, it's got to be up there, and we've got to put the money in if we want to create economic opportunities and for future generations of West Yorkshire. But I was on a call this week, and they said that the billions of pounds that we have been left behind in terms of transport pounds in the north, it's phenomenal. Even if they give us 100 billion, we probably need 160 billion on top of that to catch up to the north-south divide, unfortunately. So I'm not sure about the commercial revenue from stations. I don't know if you just read the report on Birmingham Station, where John Lewis have actually pulled out of Birmingham Rail Station, and that'll leave a significant gap in terms of making stations into shopping malls. I'm not sure, if that's the right thing to do or not. Any more questions or comments? If we've got 7 minutes to close. Please do work with your district chairs. So we've got Councillor Taj Salam, and like we said, any of the topics that we've been discussing today can be put onto district chairs' agendas by the chair. So we've got Councillor Taj Salam for Bradford, Councillor Peter Cahill for Leeds, Councillor Daniel Sutherland for Calderdale, Councillor Kevin Swift for Wakefield, and Councillor Peter Homewood for Kirklees. James Homewood, sorry. Councillor James Homewood, who is on the call. So if there's nothing more, then I will close the meeting. And thank you all for your time. I think it's been really valuable. I think it shows that we can actually call a meeting and have a Zoom meeting at any time we want, any time of the day or late evening. And that, I think, it opens WYCA up to a much wider audience, if I'm honest, which has been good. So thank you so much.
The questions have been brilliant.
Yeah, really good.
The questions we need to direct us in what we do.
But please, if you've got any more questions that you want answering, we'll make sure you get all the information that's been presented today. Please contact your district chairs or email myself or any of the team at WYCA.
Just to answer Mr. Cornby's question, I think we are planning to have the district ones later in the autumn. Can't remember the dates off the top of my head. But yes, now that we've got into this new way of doing things, then we'll do them on a district by district basis.
Okay. So it's Friday, so go enjoy your weekend.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.